All right, so we're going to talk about some acts. First of all, think in your head, what do you think an act is? Okay, in the acts that we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about the Sugar Act, the Quartering Act, and the Stamp Act. So give yourself a moment to think what those might be. Okay, so the first act, and see if it matches what you had thought they might be. The first act is the Sugar Act. And yes, that was if you got tax on sugar or sugar product or molasses, you are correct. Okay. Now, the Sugar Act of 1764 actually lowered the price or the tax on sugar. You would think, well, why are they so mad? They lowered the price of sugar, the tax on sugar. Well, what happened was with the other Sugar Act, with the other tax on sugar, there were colonists who were smuggling sugar into the colonies. So the British weren't making any profit. They weren't paying any taxes on that illegal sugar. So they lowered the tax in hopes that the colonists were like, well, tax is cheaper now, so let's just pay the British. Well, no, colonists were still mad because it created harsher penalties for those who were caught. Because the British were like, well, we're helping you out by lowering the tax. So if you're still smuggling it illegally, and by the way, smuggling is sneaking it in, then the penalty is going to be harder. And so people were very, very upset because they were denied a trial, the right to a trial, and they were just put in jail. Then you have a lawyer named James Otis. So remember his name. He's a lawyer from Boston. He argued that not only he didn't like the tax, but he said that Parliament, which is the lawmakers in England, had no right to tax the colonists. Not even a little bit. And his argument was because there was no colonist in Parliament. So they had no representation. That's where you get the term taxation without representation. These colonists were not so much mad that they had to pay taxes, because we all pay taxes. It's just that they had nobody to say whether, how to pay these taxes. They had nobody representing them in Parliament. So that was their main argument. And this started off a whole set of issues. All right, so now let's talk about the Quartering Act. Not a quarter, but if that helps you remember, you could use that to help you remember. But the Quartering Act dealt with British troops staying in the homes of the colonists. So with this act, a British soldier, or the redcoats, as we're going to start calling them, were able to move into your house, take your home away, and you had to feed them, you had to serve them, and they could do just about anything without any consequences. And so this was intended to kind of restore order, because people are already upset because of the Sugar Act, and the other things that the British are doing are not making the colonists very happy. So they said, hey, well, let's send these soldiers over there. They have to accept them into their homes. What could possibly go wrong? So this started a lot of riots and protests in the streets. It didn't end well for anybody, especially the colonists who had to house these soldiers. Okay. All right, let's get into the Stamp Act. So we know all these taxes have started because after the French and Indian War, the British were paying for this war. They paid upwards of 70 million pounds. So I don't know exactly how much that is in today's money, but it's definitely in the hundreds of millions, if not, in the billions. So British citizens were upset, like, hey, why are we paying for all this? So that's why they started taxing the colonists. So the Stamp Act taxed printed material. So anything from diplomas to marriage licenses, newspapers, and even playing cards. The colonists were upset because, again, there is no representation in Parliament for them. Already they were kind of upset because of the Navigation Act. Navigation Act didn't allow them to trade with any other country. They could only trade with British ships. So they already felt that they were paying their fair share and making money for mother country, for England. So the colonists truly believed that their own people are the only ones that could decide what taxes they got to pay. And since their own people were not in parliament, they were like, well, we're not paying these taxes. So when the British sent these tax collectors, they were tarred and feathered. Okay? Let me say that again. They were tarred and feathered. That was their protest. Not looting. Or at least they did loot, but this is tar and feathering. Okay? Just imagine if we did that today. Okay? So it created so much chaos that you had representatives from different colonies send letter to Parliament saying, we're not paying this. Y'all need to get rid of this. So they boycotted a lot of the businesses that were from England. And because of the loss of money, the tar and feathering of these tax collectors, the loss of businesses, and the rioting, Parliament had no choice but to repeal the Stamp Act. Repeal means cancel. They backtracked. They're like, just kidding. We're not going to have it. And this was in 1766 when they repealed it. So King George III was mad. He took it personal. So this didn't automatically stop the taxes. They just said no on the Stamp Act. But tensions are already high. Colonists are already starting to protest. They're already starting to question whether England should still be their leader. So with all these taxes, all these protests, you start having heroes or leaders emerge. You have people like Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry. We already talked about our lawyer friend, James Otis. So Samuel Adams was in favor of what James Otis was saying. No taxation without representation. That became a rally cry. Kind of like I don't know, you could call it like their slogan. No taxation without representation. And he founded a secret society called the Sons of Liberty, which helped organize different protests. And we have different organizations right now that organize protests. So Sons of Liberty was one of them. And then for the women, they created Daughters of Liberty. This urged Americans to use homemade clothes and household goods. That was their way of protesting British products coming in. And then you have one of my favorite people, Patrick Henry. He was also a lawyer and a member of the House of Burgesses. He also believed that no taxation without representation was their rally cry. He inspired people in Virginia and in the House of Burgesses to protest the Stamp Act. But some people believe that these protests were a form of treason. That means when you are betraying your country. So his quote, one of the quotes that he said was, "If this be treason, make the most of it." And he implied overthrowing the king. So, again, treason is a crime against the government to which one should be loyal. And then one of his most famous quotes, "Give me liberty or give me death." Okay? Now, all of this should sound very familiar, especially in present times. But it's funny because the same people in present times who are against these protests are the same kind of people that were in favor of the protests that we're studying. So it has really nothing to do with them protesting. This has more to do with race, of course. Okay? It's okay to protest if you're a certain type of person, but if you're not, how dare you protest against this country?